Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. If you have any questions or any comments that you have at the end after I'm finished, feel free to ask, and I'll see what I can do. First of all, I'm very happy to be here in Akron. I thought I was going to get a reprieve from Syracuse weather. I think it's like 1 degree colder here today, surprisingly to me. So I think we have you beat on a quantity of snow, though. That's about it. But anyway, so it's something that's familiar to me. Wear another jacket, it's fine. As was mentioned, I've been here before. I have very good memories of the last time I was here, which has been a while. It's been probably about a decade or so, 8 or 9, maybe 10 years or so. And it was a full orchestral program. And this time we have a concerto solo with Prokofiev's second piano concerto with Gabriela Martinez, which I'm very excited about. I've already worked with her in the Wichita Symphony, doing the same piece actually. That's a coincidence that doesn't happen very often in my world. And I also want to mention that I am good old friends with Christopher Wilkins, your music director. And I think he's one of those salt of the earth people, as I'm sure you do as well. I met him when he was the associate conductor of the Utah Symphony back in about the mid-'80s. And I was attending the University of Utah as a graduate student in conducting. And I sought him out because I knew he was a very successful conductor. And I would go down to the Utah Symphony and watch some of those rehearsals. And I met him at a certain point, and he was just very generous with his time. Here I was, a young conductor, not knowing very much about what to actually do on the podium. And I asked him if he would help me with a videotape that I had of me conducting, and he did. He watched it and gave me some pointers, and then I took some scores over to him, some orchestral scores, subsequently to see what he could do to kind of emphasize certain things or reveal certain things about the score, and it was really practically overwhelming for me. So I got some good counsel from Chris on all that. So we've stayed in touch over the years. I've had him come guest conduct my orchestras. He's had me come guest conduct his orchestras over the years. So it's a bonus I feel like I have. We did the Brahms Second Symphony last night, and as mentioned, and I was really pretty blown away with your orchestra. Again, as I mentioned before, I've been here, but to hear them read through that Brahms symphony so beautifully and have this flexibility of sound and tempo that they just could go with me, how I showed the music, that was very, very special. So we worked on some things. We'll have 3 more rehearsals, and we'll have a great concert, so I hope you'll all be there. Now, just to back up, I thought I would give a little bit of background about myself. Mine is not the typical path to being a conductor, but I don't know if there is a typical path. I mean, there are certain things you have to do, but for me, it was a little bit different. And I think this is also for the young people over there. Welcome, by the way. And I just wanted to say I was born in Denver, Colorado, and was raised there until I was about 9 years old. I'm the oldest of 3 children. And then we all moved to a little tiny town, Aberdeen, Idaho, the mecca of culture. It was great because it gave me an opportunity to go out and take long walks. I studied piano at that age. But the first thing that really got me excited about music, everyone asked, what was this light bulb moment for you? And it was one day when I was 9 years old, I was rifling through my parents' LP collection. LPs for you guys. No, they're coming back. Vinyl's coming back, right? So I'm rifling through this collection of LPs, and I find this one that is so striking on the cover, and it's one of Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg Variations, 1955 recording, very famous one. And I was struck by it because I thought it looked so pretentious. I thought that he looked like a poser, like he couldn't really be a great artist because he was, all these pictures with him, his hair is all messed up and his shirt buttons weren't lined up and one side of the collar was up. I thought, oh, what is this, So I took out the record, I put it on and listened, and in 5 seconds, I was in a spell. This guy changed my life, this recording. It was the way Glenn Gould played it. It was also Bach. It was just the state of mind that I was in. And at that point, I knew that music had to be my ruling passion. So that was my moment. I can point to that as an epiphany Because, and it was, you know, now in hindsight, I can see how that works so well for a child my age, because, you know, has all these variations. It's only about a 30-minute piece of the way he played it, because he played a lot of quick tempos and no repeats. So each variation was only about a minute or two. So everything changed very quickly. But I was so drawn in by this. Many people say, oh, was it 1812 Overture for you? Or, you know, what was the piece of music that really got you in? It's like, I don't think that would have done it at all. It was this kind of music, just a solo piano that got me into it. And from that point on, I started to just I tried to play by ear because I didn't have the music to read from. So I was trying to play that. And no, that's okay. We're in a you know, technological world where those things happen now. Just don't do it at the end of Mahler Ninth Symphony. Did you hear that story? Alan Gilbert conducting the New York Philharmonic, end of the Ninth Symphony of Mahler, where it's just this quiet music that just kind of goes off into the ether. And right when there's about a minute left, this phone went off, super loud, and it did not get silenced. Turns out there's a poor chap who had just gotten the phone, and it was, the alarm was on, and he didn't know how to disarm it, so it wasn't someone calling him. And he was about in the third row from the stage, and he was sitting there, and he was just petrified. He didn't know what to do. He had just gotten it and didn't know his way around it. And the people were jeering at him, and, you know, security came and escorted him out. It was a big deal. And Alan, the conductor, I know him a little bit. He was conducting for a while, and he just kept going, but it was too much. And he turned around and he said, "Are you going to get that?" So anyway, the guy got taken out, and he was mortified. Anyway, we don't want to hear those things in a musical event, of course, but we also have to understand that our world is changing a lot. And to get too uptight about some of those things might not be the right thing either. We should do everything in our power to not let them happen. But hey, we're human. Sometimes it happens. Anyway, don't need to get off on that tangent too much. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is also for you young people over there, about some of the things that really inspired me and didn't get in the way for me for something that I wanted to do. I recently gave a commencement address at Bethel College, which was my alma mater. It's in North Newton, Kansas. And I talked about the subject of really following your dream. You know, if you have a passion, you should really go for that. A friend of mine texted me an article from Market Watch finance blog that criticized me for giving that speech. I thought, how did I end up in Market Watch? It's like, well, Daniel Hege is giving this advice to young people to follow their dream. But is that really the wisest thing to do in this day and age? Because if your dream is to do medieval poetry, let's say, or whatever it is, there may not be a market for it out there. There may not be something out there for you to actually make a living on if that's your passion. And I think that was really taken out of context, because when I say you need to follow your dream, that's if you actually have one. Then you should follow that. I think sometimes people are at a point in their lives where they don't have that dream, and so they create one, which becomes artificial. And then it's something that they don't really know what they're getting into. A story on that is someone who wanted to become a marine biologist, and they said, that just sounds awesome. And then they learned that, you know, every day they're kind of moving water from one tank to another for something, and like, oh, wasn't anything that I thought it was. But maybe that wasn't their passion. So you have to discover what that is, and then you go for it. You don't simply start doing it. So that was my point about that, and that leads into the story that when I did finally decide to become a conductor, because that did not just happen when I was a kid. In fact, I was halfway through college when it happened. I was asked to come in and conduct a choral rehearsal on very short notice. And I thought, why did he tap me to do this hour-long choral rehearsal in his absence? But I ended up going into the choral rehearsal, and I realized I knew the music very well, and I rehearsed it a cappella and everything, and I thought, oh, that's when the light bulb went on, that maybe conducting is something that I should at least explore. I never had this romantic notion of, I want to be a conductor, right? Or, you know, watching Leonard. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, you know, a lot of people I talk to say, oh, I saw Leonard Bernstein in the young people's concerts, and I wanted to be that person on the podium. And that's what really got me going. I never really thought about that. It was only after I'd actually done it that I started to develop a curiosity for it. So there's a quick story I want to tell you. Robert Shaw, you know this name, the Dean of American Conductors, especially for choral, also orchestral. He was going to be conducting a program with the Grand Teton Music Festival and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, not far from Aberdeen. I mean, it's up in Teton. That's our backyard, basically. And I was a grad student by now, studying conducting at the University of Utah. That's where I met Chris. And I decided I wanted to go up to see that rehearsal, but I had to know if I could get into the rehearsal. So I called him, and I couldn't get a hold of Robert Shaw. And people later asked me, "You tried to call Robert Shaw? What's wrong with you? You can't call someone that famous. I mean, it's ridiculous." And I remember I called the Atlanta phone book. I was calling every Robert Shaw. There were like 12 of them. Pretty popular name. And I say, "Are you the conductor?" "No, I get that all the time, Clay." And I say, "Are you the conductor?" "No, man." I couldn't get him. So I thought, well, he's in Salt Lake rehearsing the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. That's where he'd be right now. So I called all these hotels, Marriott, Hilton, Ramada Inn, no. And finally I found it. And I said, "Will you leave this message for Robert Shaw? That I want to talk to him about whether I can come to the rehearsal, because I can't miss work and just go up there and come back." And I didn't, I struck out. Well, of course, he didn't get the message. I thought, well, he's my grandpa's generation, so he's probably up by 6. So I said, but I'll wait an extra hour, call him at 7. Called him at 7, his wife answers. I hear grumbling in the background. And I explained the story to her. She goes, "Just come to the rehearsal, it'll be fine." Okay. So I go up there and I watch the rehearsal. I'm amazed. It was Mendelssohn Elijah. I was cloud 9. Couldn't believe it, overwhelmed. And I went back to meet him afterwards, and I was walking behind him. "Excuse me, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Shaw." He's walking quickly with his little, entourage, protecting him like security. And he won't even pay attention to me. He wouldn't turn around at all. And finally I said, Mr. Shaw, I'm Daniel Hege. I'm the one. And he stopped. He recognized that name. And he turned around and he said, "You have a lot to learn about manners, young man. You don't call anyone at 7 a.m. And at first I thought he was kidding, because I was like, come on. I mean, you get that upset over that, and you're just like holding it in, like through all those rehearsals and everything. And then you tell me this. And so I started to really massage his ego. I said, you're doing all the hero worship of all the people who talked about him. And if you ever get a chance to see Robert Shaw, you never miss that opportunity. You have to go. And so when I told him, he's like, smiling, and okay, that sounds good. And then I said, and I'm good friends with Elvira Vos, this other person. He said, and that's another thing. How could someone who's a friend of Elvira Vos call me at 7 a.m.? And he turned around and started off like, "Oh, I ruined it." I thought, he's going to put his thumb on me for the rest of my life, so I can't do something, Now, I tell that story because you don't let things stand in your way. I had to go see him, and there was nothing that was going to stop me, and I got to do it. And so I called, and I would not back down. Because if I couldn't have reached him, I probably wouldn't have gone, because they told me at the Teton Festival when I called them, they said, "You have to get permission from him if you want to see the rehearsal." And I'm like, that's when I was like, I don't think it's going to happen. But I said, but I'm going to do it. Don't let things stand in your way. If there's a will, you'll find it. You'll find a way. The other thing I have to say is to always be prepared, because you never know what's going to come up. You find that luck tends to favor the prepared people. And I say this because as an associate conductor of the Baltimore Symphony, where I worked with David Zinman and Yuri Temirkanov, we took a Japan tour. And David Zinman was the music director, and he was conducting for all 2 weeks, almost every day program. We had 2 programs. And right before the last one, he came down with kidney stones. And in fact, the executive director 2 days before that was saying, "You know what, we're probably not going to have the associate conductor come with us anymore, because we never need that person. The conductor is always fine." But all of a sudden, right before the last concert, David Zinman gets sick. And they tapped me about 6 hours before the performance to go in and do it. It was a big program, pieces I hadn't conducted before. Symphonie Fantastique of Berlioz, Debussy's La Mer, Prokofiev Classical Symphony, and I had to just do it with no rehearsal. And it went really well, but I had been really studying those pieces up to that point, so it really advanced me with the orchestra as well. But that's just another lesson to always be prepared as you go into anything, because suddenly you don't know when your opportunity is going to come. I wanted to talk a little bit about the program that we're going to have. We've talked about this as being kind of a Brahms extravaganza, because we're starting with Hungarian dances, numbers 1 and 5. And those are the ones, if you think, oh, I wonder if I know those. Yes, you do. I can already tell you, you do. Whether you know them by number or not. They're both in G minor, but they're very exciting and a great way to open the concert, like a great curtain raiser. And then, of course, we're closing with Brahms's just magisterial Second Symphony, which tends to be described as the sunniest, which is great for this time of year, of Brahms's symphonies. And comparable in many ways to Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, which is also this kind of bucolic kind of quality. But there's so much inwardness in the piece as well, because that seems to be a little bit of Brahms's nature. Let me go to Brahms after I talk about the other piece on the program, which we shouldn't forget about, but it's Prokofiev's Second Piano Concerto. And Gabriela Martinez is going to be the soloist. And as I mentioned, I worked with her already this fall on the same piece, and she's going to knock your socks off. I mean, this concerto is one of the most virtuosic and difficult concertos simply to play from a pyrotechnical standpoint. I mean, she's also very musical. I hate to just put it out there that, oh, it takes all this technique. Well, of course it does, and every piece requires a lot of technique. But this particular one is so athletic in the way that it has to be executed. In fact, there are a number of towering pianists who have not even wanted to touch it. Marta Argerich is one who said no. Marta Argerich would say no to that because she can play anything. Evgeny Kissin waited much longer, later in life, to actually attack such a piece. But she's got it, and she almost makes it look easy. It's incredible. That piece is very visceral. It has a very spiky kind of texture that it will contrast nicely to the Brahms. And so I think you're going to enjoy that in between the two Brahms works. So now about Brahms, a little bit, the piece, and Brahms as a person and as a composer. Brahms was highly self-critical. And I don't know, in some ways I think we all have that quality. We look at ourselves, we're very self-aware. How do we compare? Brahms seemed to have this in spades, almost more than anyone. He wrote a lot of music, but he burned a lot of music. So when you finally find that Brahms published a work, you know that he put his stamp of approval on it, which is really high praise from himself, because he was stricter on himself than anyone else. It didn't help the fact that when he was about 20 years old, he met the eminent Robert Schumann, who's also an editor for Die Zeit, I can say the future, the new music. And he proclaimed that Brahms is going to be the next Beethoven. He said, you're the heir to Beethoven. Now, for someone who's already carrying all this self-doubt on their shoulders, this was yet one more thing that was going to weigh him down, because he thought, there's no way that I can compare to Beethoven. Everyone who composed after Beethoven lived in Beethoven's long shadow. And so this was going to be something that he would have to overcome. And when he wrote his first symphony, it took him over 20 years to actually compose it. Not just continually writing on it, but he would write it and then he would say, I'm not ready for this. Because when you write an actual symphony, as opposed to a piano concerto or as opposed to a sonata, you're actually showing off your intellectual heft. You're showing how you can create form and structure and motivic design in music that would really be something to really look up to in the way that Beethoven did, in the way that Beethoven kind of bent and broke some of the rules of the norms of expectation in classical music. And that's why he just didn't feel like he was ready for it. When he finally wrote his first symphony, after those 20 years, the next 3 symphonies, he wrote 4 total. They came out rather lucidly and very smoothly. So he composed the second symphony that you're going to hear. He wrote it in one summer, sat down and wrote it. And I think it'd be very difficult to say that one Brahms symphony is better than another. The fact that he wrote this one quickly compared to the first one. You can't say, well, maybe it's not as good because he didn't spend as much time. Not the case at all. Brahms has this way of writing in a very cerebral way, but with a lot of passion. So you have this perfect melding of the mind and the heart. You feel like it's happening at all times. He takes one little idea. This is very much a Beethovenian idea as well. And he uses it like as though it's one brick. And he builds an entire cathedral with it, because he's able to use that very economical amount of musical material and develop it in so many different ways, which is really a central idea to Germanic thinking. Rather than having a plethora of ideas and many different melodies, let's say, oh, I have all these ideas, like Tchaikovsky, just pouring out with melodies. He said, let's use one. Let's, in fact, not even use a whole melody, let's just use a few notes, and let's spin those out into as many possibilities. It was about development, what you can do with an idea. So now with Brahms, we don't simply have, here's the first theme, and now here's the transition, and here's the second theme, and so on. But now the transition is already part of the first theme and part of the second theme, because it's evolving into the next theme. And it almost becomes like it's a theme in and of itself. So now you recognize that we're in the second theme, but we were already sort of there before it. It's how he's blending all of these things together so that it's endless development and variation. And that's what I love so much about Brahms. And that's why when you perform Brahms, when I perform Brahms, I feel like it's like Holy Scripture, because there's so much in it. And it has the perfect amount of pathos and the perfect amount of cerebral quality that I think that people can feel. And you don't have to sit there and go, I have to understand how those half steps work and then this. No, it's not that kind of thinking. It's something that you simply absorb when you just feel it somehow. It's very difficult to explain. But you know it sometimes when you look at a great painting, that the proportions are just such a way that everything works. And you might not be able to explain it in an analytical way, but you can just sense it. And I think that's that way when you listen to Mozart. When you listen to Haydn or certain Beethoven, there's a certain thing about the proportions. They're not square by any means, but somehow the way the amalgam of everything's put together, you just sense there's something so right about it. And I think that's what Brahms does on a very, very high level. It ends with one of the most triumphant endings of the symphonies, and all the way through it goes through so many different moods and characters. I just want to say, again, what a great experience it was to conduct the Akron Symphony last night in the rehearsal. They just read this through like they had played it last week. And it hasn't been just last week, obviously. A lot of them played in different groups as well. But they knew it so well, and they were just so delightful to work with. So you really have a cultural jewel here. I know you know that, but you have to hear it from someone else as well, someone who comes in, and I've conducted a lot of orchestras. The way they respond and the way they want to work and the way they want to make something very special is very special. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask, or any comments? Let me think of a question. I know you do a lot with the community collaborations. You were talking about this, and you had mentioned the Chihuly glass sculptures that we did with the Bartók, Bluebeard's Castle. Bluebeard's Castle by Bartók could be a piece that would not be for every person in the community. They would think that on the surface, because I don't like Bartók, he's too dissonant. The subject matter is a little out there. I don't know if I want to deal with that. But this opera, Bluebeard's Castle, happened to strike all the right notes. Not only did we get Samuel Ramey, who's one of the most famous bass baritones of his generation, and has sung the piece with the Met, and has sung it in Hungarian, in Hungary, in its original language. We have him at Wichita. So he's teaching at Wichita State now. So he was Bluebeard, the title role. Nancy Maltzby was the other one. So on the number of notes, I'm talking about why it was successful. It's an opera, but it's only 60 minutes. It's not 4 hours, okay? So that's one good thing. I mean, look, I love Wagner. So there's nothing wrong with 4 hours, but I'm just saying, for the general population, you want to get them in. The other thing is it doesn't require a lot of sets. It doesn't require staircases and things that people have to run up and windows, because the whole opera is psychological. It's psychological. It's something that's happening on the inner life. And so the only sets you require are the doors in the castle to look into the different rooms of Duke Bluebeard. And the issue of the story is that he has a new young bride, Judith, who gets very curious, what's behind this door? What's behind this door? And he said, you said you already loved me. Why do I have to tell you all these things? And the way the story is told, you actually can feel like you're in her shoes and his shoes at the same time. It's an amazing story. And Dale Chihuly was commissioned to create these glass sculptures that represented each room. And so when we put that part, that component, into presenting this, we had people coming out from all over the community saying, reaching for their checkbook, how can I support this? I want this to happen. These sculptures are like 12 feet high. They're very large, and you have special lights on them. It was amazing. And we had someone come in from the Chihuly estate and speak about it and show a film. That was a separate thing. And then we had people able to look at all the sculptures up close if they were a high donor. It was a really, really great experience. Musically, it's theatrically very intense and almost cinematic in the way the score is written. So I'm just saying, just think about it. It'd be great for the community. It's one of the collaborations we do, which we've done many as well. That's what we have to do in this day and age with the symphony orchestras. We have to find those other people in the community that we can work together with to make something very special. Well, if there are no, there's.
I actually have 3. You can answer whichever.
Okay.
First of all, would be, do you play any other instruments than piano? And the second one would be, have you composed any music or have interest in composing? That's something a conductor does. And the third one would be, what was your favorite piece that you conducted?
Oh, wow. Okay, so the question was, what other instrument do I play? Do I do any composing? And what's my favorite piece that I've conducted? So oboe was my main instrument. That's like Chris also. I know, that was another thing that we had in common. Piano did not stay my primary instrument. It was my first instrument. But when I got a little bit older, then I wanted to learn the oboe because I just adored that sound. And I wanted to be in the orchestra doing that. So that was my main instrument. But as soon as I got my first conducting job right out of graduate school, which I was very lucky to get, I learned that I did not have time for reed making. You must make your reeds if you're an oboist, and that takes about 2 hours every day. And that's not even starting to practice yet. So it's like, I just can't continue with that. So anyway, I play more piano now. Now, as far as composing, I'm sort of in the closet with composing because it's nothing that I would want anyone to hear, except for me. But I do think to be a complete musician, I think that we must also create, not only recreate, which is what we mostly do. You know, when people go to music school and they go play in an orchestra or they play chamber music or solo recital or whatever it is, they're usually playing something that someone else wrote and they're interpreting it, they're not creating it. But I think that there's a very important component of being a musician is being able to actually write, to be able to create. And so I do spend time doing that. But it's really to train myself. And it helps me to understand the kind of choices that other composers make. And that helps me in interpretation. So when I'm looking at the score, I'm just looking at the score because Brahms did not leave behind CDs for us to study or anything. He left the score, that's it. So I look at that and I see what it reveals to me, what I can notice about it to bring out. And when I compose, it helps me think about those things that they have to think about. So you're putting yourself a little bit into the mind of the composer that you're studying at the time. And the last one, that is a very difficult one. Which piece is my favorite to conduct? This sounds cop-out, but it is Brahms' Second Symphony. No, I mean, this week, seriously, when you are so absorbed in a certain work, that's really all you can think about. And you find everything that's great about it at that moment. I mean, there have been, you know, I could give you a long list of pieces, really. Beethoven Ninth, of course, Mahler's Second Symphony. I did Mahler's Seventh Symphony last spring, and that was an incredible experience. Ein Heldenleben of Richard Strauss. There are many works. It's very difficult to say it's this one. This is the one I want to do. And by that admission, you would have to say, therefore, this one is less favorite one to conduct, you know, because if this one's the most, then this one has to be something else. I really pour myself into whatever I'm doing that week. I feel fortunate that it's Brahms this week because I have such a reverence for the music. Yes, sir.
Before the performance, what number do I call to get into the
Rehearsal. Yeah, rehearsals are very interesting. I mean, I would always, actually, for several years, I would drive from Syracuse to Cleveland to watch the Cleveland Orchestra rehearse. Because as a conductor, especially as a conductor, but for any musician or any curious person, you learn so much by how a piece is put together. You know, you listen carefully and you hear the differences between how they play it the first time and play it the second time and so on. I think it's a fascinating dynamic to watch the conductor interact with an orchestra. And that's something, you know, for example, as a guest conductor coming to the Akron Symphony, I mean, we don't work together too often, once every 10 years or something. So it's really like it's a fresh face coming in, and how do you put together a complex program, just seeing them, and here we go, add water and go, here's the program, because we only have 3 days to put it together. But really, the orchestras today, and Akron Symphony is one of them, are on such a high level that they have an expectation of the conductor who comes in, that the conductor is going to be on a very high level too, and have a vision for the work. And the conductor comes into the rehearsal having a very high expectation of what the orchestra can produce, and how they can be flexible and develop a unified vision. And when you put those two things together, usually it works very, very well. Number one thing in the rehearsal last night, I don't say a word for about the first hour or so. I don't. Because I think it's very important. Conducting is a nonverbal activity. And so we have to make sure that we understand each other in the nonverbal sense before anything else. And so after we develop this kind of relationship, they know what to expect from me in the gesture, and I know what to expect from them and the sound they're producing. Then we can go back and then we start to work and get down into the trenches a little bit. Yes?
What has been your biggest performance?
What has been my biggest performance? Good question. I mean, if you're talking about prestige of the hall, I played in Carnegie Hall. We conducted the Syracuse Symphony in Carnegie Hall once, and that was a very, very special concert. I have to rank that right up there as one of my favorite concerts. I also worked with Yo-Yo Ma on the Elgar Cello Concerto once, and that was a spectacular experience working with him, so I'd put that right up there too. I would say the time that I made my debut at the Suntory Hall in Japan when David Ziman got sick, the story I told you earlier, when I had to step in on short notice, that was also a revelatory kind of experience for me to step in and just work with an orchestra, having not said a word to them, getting on the podium and no rehearsal and just doing the concert. That was also very special. So those were kind of overwhelming experiences, but those were three. I can just think off the top of my head. I think this Saturday, maybe another one. So don't miss it. Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
When you do your performances, like, how do you feel? Like, do you feel nervous or do you feel excited?
When I do my performances, do I feel nervous or excited? Both. You know, my daughters, I have 3 daughters, and they would play piano, go to a piano recital. I'm so nervous. I said, you know what? You should embrace that nervousness because you're going to get it. It's a normal thing, but you need to turn the nervousness into something that's really positive. Like it's going to make you just concentrate. It can also help you almost relax in a strange way because If you don't feel nervous at all, then you should get nervous. I'm going out there like it's not like it's a non-event. That's not a really good thing, I think. You should feel a little bit, it's not good to be stressed out about something. I don't mean that like you can't even function kind of thing. But I think it's good to have a little bit of nervousness, and not nervousness might not be quite the right word. It is excitement, but you're also doing something that's like an athletic event. An athletic event, you don't know. You train for 8 years to go to the Olympics, and you pull your hamstring in the first heat. It's like, oh, how could that happen? Because it happens in time. You prepare and prepare and prepare, and something could go wrong. Something could go wrong. Now you hope it doesn't. Things shouldn't go wrong, but you don't know. It's a performance. So there's that little bit of wondering about it. And of course, you don't fixate on it. You just go out there and you're very positive. But you also, as a conductor, I can say, you feel like there's a great deal of responsibility. Not power at all, but you are an enabler for the musicians who are on stage to do their very best. And you try to create the atmosphere, the right environment for them to execute what they have to do so that the audience can get the most out of it. So it's more like you have this big responsibility. And that's how I think of it. But I am always very excited to go out and do that. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How are you involved in selecting the music for the program?
How am I involved in selecting the music for the program? I talked with Christopher on the phone. We talked about it, and it usually kind of morphs into the kind of program they need. For example, the programs for the season are pretty much set up. And then you see kind of what else do we need to make the season complete? Because you want lots of variety in the programming. If you had done another Brahms symphony earlier in the season, a Brahms symphony probably would not have been asked of me. But because that looked like maybe one of the composers, one of the kind of textures, one of the sonic palettes that we need, that you needed in the Akron Symphony schedule for this season, a Brahms symphony came up as the kind of second half of the program. And so Brahms' second, I think, was the more due of the 4 symphonies of Brahms. And we talked about what concerto could go with that, and we went back and forth, and we looked at a couple soloists, and I mentioned that Prokofiev, I think, works well, balances well nicely with Brahms because the textures are so different, the language is so different, and then the Brahms is so warm and lush and contrast. And then we thought, well, let's make bookends of the whole thing and make kind of a structural bookend of the program by doing the Hungarian dances. They're so popular. And the Second Symphony was also popular, and putting this meaty Prokofiev 30-minute concerto in the middle. So it was just a dialogue that we had. But it really starts from the Akron Symphony because it's their program. So, well, I don't want to hold you up anymore. So thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful to be here.